Welcome back. This is the Polit Bureau, a special edition from Nasrec, the venue of the ANC conference. Now, as party leaders often say, the power in the ANC lies with the branches, and President Jacob Zuma reiterated that today. Let's take a listen.
That is why branches determine the policy of the ANC. Amandla asemasebeni, but amandla asemasebeni but aniwasebenzisi. Ninele nibakhetha abantu kube yibona babuya bazonikeza ama instructions. The funny thing, this conference is your conference in the main. If you take decisions here as recommendations, it is in actual fact the branches that have taken the decisions.
When he left the speech, he had a lot of anecdotes which were completely off the mark and ANC and actually divisive. For instance, he attacked our stalwarts. We have confidence in the stalwarts of our movement, and we think that they still possess massive wisdom and knowledge of the ANC and how it has operated over the years. And I think that when he also spoke to the question of the alliance position on him stepping down, whilst he has reaffirmed in his written notes that these are independent formations, but he comes here, he undermines that.
He has had to go. We've had to let him go. But I am continuing the discussion. I'm joined by two political analysts, and that is Lukhona Mnguni and Ibrahim Fakir. Ibrahim, perhaps let me start with you. President Jacob Zuma speaking about the power lying in the branches, and you have Solly Mapaila from the SACP countering him and saying that the president was actually factional in his speech, especially when he went off script, where he talks about the power of the branches and how the branches had elected the NEC members, and these NEC members now want to remove the president who was not elected by them, who was elected by the branches. What is President Jacob
who twice attempted a motion of no confidence in him within the ANC NEC. So he's technically correct about the fact that branches do actually have the power, and I think what the president omits to tell us is that branches are manipulated, and they would concede that. The Secretary General's reports say so. The second thing he omits to tell us is that the branches, if they were so influential and powerful, how come they didn't do their work for the 2016 local government elections, particularly in the metropolitan areas? The third is what the president omits to tell us about the branches, is that it's branch delegates who come to a conference at the end of the year to vote for particular individuals. But those people also gave a mandate to the NEC members. The NEC members didn't appoint themselves. They were elected, like the president was, by the very same branch delegates who came to a conference, and therefore they carry the mandate of their branches.
Lukhona, let me bring you in here. President Thabo Mbeki was removed by the very same NEC that President Jacob Zuma today is telling branches here that they actually don't have the power to have done that, and is actually in a way saying, what do you have to say as the branches if the NEC members who were elected by you are trying to do this to your president?
Well, certainly, I mean, it's also a self-preservation strategy. That's one. The second part is that he knows that this conference doesn't have any power to move in a way, a motion of no confidence on the president. They have to stick to their agenda, and the agenda is discussing policies. But he is trying to agitate the branches against any leaders that want to undermine the centrality of the branches in the ANC. But we do know that the NEC is the highest decision-making body in between conferences. What I've always found quite interesting is why NEC members feel that they must move a motion of no confidence in the president, rather than charging him with disciplinary proceedings, because the president is not above disciplinary processes of the party. Because if you feel that the president has brought the party into disrepute, then move a charge. And I think this is one strategy that it would be interesting to understand from the leadership within the NEC as to why they don't want to be seen as charging their own president as having brought the party into disrepute, because that is the essence behind these motions of no confidence on the president. It might be that they want a much more ceremonial exit for the president, because in essence, Polit, it's always trying to prevail on the president to resign. Any motion of no confidence must still say to the president, please resign from the seat of government, because they can't then say, okay, no motion, therefore it translates to us voting for you out in parliament, because that would still mean that they are embarrassing themselves as the ANC. So the motion of no confidence is always trying to create a ceremonial exit. But I think now, with the many attempts that have happened, probably we are at a point where those who feel strongly must move a disciplinary procedure against the president.
Well, that remains to be seen. When we continue, our panel discusses day one of the policy conference, and of course we continue with this discussion because Gwede Mantashe makes mention of the issue of regime change, and perhaps I want to actually throw to that bite if that bite is ready. Let's try that.
The essence of a color revolution is to create discontent, agitate, and then process graduate into revolts, and therefore remove regimes from power. You take the Marikana situation, though when we discuss it, we normally focus on the brutality of the police. We never look into the question of trying to undermine an authority and provoke security forces into action, and therefore faced with a massacre, and therefore it becomes a new crisis. We never go to that analysis. We look into the fees must fall, hashtag fees must fall. Quite an important issue taken up, but as you meet the demands, new demands get generated, it continues. As it moved on, you begin to see the change of the character of the protests. And our view is that look at them, analyze them, look at the difference of the character of the marches for Zuma and general protests in South Africa. Look at the demographics, look at everything. You can see that elements of color revolution are there, which are aimed at removing a legitimate authority and replace it with a blind puppet regime.
All right. Ibrahim, Secretary General Gwede Mantashe says there is a regime change agenda that is going on here. There's an agenda to remove the ANC from power.
I must be honest, I was completely thrown. I thought I was living in the 1970s at the height of the Cold War. It was completely bizarre. It was paranoid, and it was almost riven with deep suspicion. And then he keeps saying, we'd be happy to give you the evidence. I would be flabbergasted if there is any evidence about what external agents want in South Africa and what interest they would have in regime change, and what their rationality would be, what kind of regime would they want in place and for what purpose. So it just sounds deeply suspicious and riven with a lot of kind of innuendo. Thus far, any evidence that they have mustered is always about donor funds, foundations, but by and large, those foundations fund local South Africans. So it's local South Africans who actually do the work that they accuse people of when they want regime change. So I found it completely bizarre. There were other things which he said which were appropriate about the organizational health, state of organizational health, but even there were serious silences and absences, and we can come back to those.
Lukon, is this regime change agenda a very real threat? Ibrahim is very skeptical about it. Is perhaps a threat inside the country over the issue of employment, the massive army of employment that the unionists will often go on about?
But let's first deal with this. Regime change, as per the Secretary General's diagnostic report, is to say there are Western countries that are interested in infiltrating South Africa, as Ibrahim is saying, external forces, with the view of buying strategic people who can lead mass movements to agitate for the fall of the ANC, let's put it that way. So he says, for example, a Zuma must fall campaign is a proxy of the fall of the ANC. A Fizz must fall campaign is a proxy for the fall of the ANC. But what this does is that it commits a crime in this sense. It undermines the South African public to say that they don't feel grievances enough to a point that they want to communicate them, enabled by the Constitution, freedom of expression, freedom of association, and the freedom talking strongly against the ANC government, we will characterize you as being part of regime change. And I think for the South African public, what they ought to do is say, if within our constitutional right and our democratic ethos, we want a change of government, which is absolutely legitimate, because another problem that he's creating is to say the ANC should govern in perpetuity, but it must govern in perpetuity under duress, and South Africans must be under duress to vote for the ANC, because if they voted out, then they would have participated in regime change. Now that is completely undemocratic, that undermines our constitutional values.
It's also a very short hop to authoritarianism. This is the moment at which they say something and ordinary branch members think, of course, we were within our rights, our organization is threatened. And that's not true. Lukona is saying South Africans have a legitimate right to change governments. That's what democracy is about, change governments. Our elections don't have external people voting here. So irrespective of who you are influenced by, the decision is ultimately made by South African citizens. So it's a complete red herring.
All right. Let's take a short break. The Polit Bureau continues after the break.